Replace the femur.
What? What kind of argument is that? I can assure you that that is never the way that it works.
Bus crashed, 24 passengers.
Are you Marco's family?
Yes. I'm Marco's father. This is his mother, Lorena. And this is Sonia. They were getting married tonight.
How's my son?
Marco's femur was completely shattered. Our only choice is to amputate.
The bone damage is too severe. There are no other options.
What if we could replace the entire femur? We're making him a new femur. It's a good idea.
It's a brilliant idea.
And I'm aware of the risks. Infection, clotting, hardware failure.
Death.
And the risks are significant, but isn't that their call?
This doctor's making a good point that there's a range of different options available, and as long as the doctors think that they're reasonable options, then it should be up to the family or the patient to make a decision about, kind of all things considered, what they decide is best.
You want to put a fake femur into Marco's leg?
I believe it's a viable option, but there are risks. In my estimation, there's a 10% chance he won't make it.
Then no.
If there's a chance we can save Marco's leg, we should at least discuss this some more. That's what he'd want.
He'd want to live. He'd want to have a life.
I know him. He'd want to take the chance.
What's playing out here is something that happens every single day, all the time in hospitals. The patient is unconscious. We don't know what he would choose in this situation. And so we have to defer to other people to figure out what the right thing to do is. And what's happening here is really common, that there's this disagreement. Marco, the patient, his parents are saying better to save his life and amputate the leg, that the risk of 10% likelihood of death in the surgery isn't worth it. And Marco's fiancee is saying, no, his leg is really valuable to him. That means a lot to him. If there's a chance that the doctors can save his leg, then they should try to do it.
When the accident happened, were you on the way to your wedding or on the way back?
We were headed to the wedding.
Marco's parents are the next of kin. They decide.
Amputate our son's leg.
This is a really interesting case because in most places there is what's called a substitute decision-making hierarchy that lists who gets to make the decision in the event that the patient is unable to make decisions for himself. Usually, in most states and Canadian provinces, it's the person's power of attorney or the person they've selected as the substitute decision maker. And if not, then there's this list that works its way down. It's usually a spouse, and then adult parents or adult children, and then it kind of goes down the list from next of kin. There are differences between each state. Each jurisdiction has slightly different things. But one thing that's really interesting is that California recently changed its law so that the approach that's playing out here is actually not really the way that it goes anymore. So in 2022, California changed its law away from having a rigid hierarchy and adopted a system where it's up to the healthcare provider to decide who the appropriate substitute decision maker should be. If the patient lacks capacity, he can't make his decisions for himself, there's a descending order of priority. So a patient can still have a healthcare proxy, as the doctor refers to it there, and then a conservator or guardian. But then it says in Section B, if a patient lacks the capacity to make a healthcare decision but does not have a legally recognized healthcare decision maker pursuant to subdivision A, the part I just read, a healthcare provider or a designee of the healthcare facility caring for the patient may choose a surrogate to make healthcare decisions on the patient's behalf, as appropriate in the given situation. The patient's surrogate shall be an adult who has demonstrated special care and concern for the patient, is familiar with the patient's personal values and beliefs to the extent known, and is reasonably available and willing to serve. A surrogate may be chosen from any of the following persons, and then it lists the spouse or domestic partner of the patient, an adult child of the patient, a parent of the patient, and so on. So what's interesting is that although the ethics issue or the issue that's playing out in this scene is really common, in California, where the show is set, this actually isn't the way that it would happen now, or at least where there wouldn't be this kind of rigid hierarchy. My reading of the law is that the doctor would actually get to decide who he thinks would be the most appropriate substitute decision maker in this case. But in like most other jurisdictions, there is this rigid hierarchy, and this would be kind of more of a problem where because the couple wasn't married, they were like an hour away from getting married, that it likely would be the parents who would be the legally entitled, or according to the law, would be the substitute decision makers.
You have to stand down. You can't amputate Marco's leg.
Why not?
I filed an emergency injunction to stop the surgery.
What the hell am I supposed to do with an unconscious patient whose leg is a ticking time bomb?
Judge Singh is en route. She wants to hear from both parties and the doctors on the case. You thought you could save the leg, and I didn't want that not happening because the parents are afraid to make a tough call.
It's their call to make.
And if the accident happened an hour later, it would be the wife's.
I think California's decision to change the law in this way is actually really interesting because I myself have seen many situations where the hierarchy is not really it doesn't track in the particular situation who is best placed. So there are situations where, although it's next of kin, a blood relative who is available, but there's a friend of the patient who has known the patient for 20 years, who just knows the patient, like clearly knows the patient way better than somebody living in a different state who doesn't really, hasn't seen the patient in many years, but happens to be genetically related to them. So I do think that there are these situations where, although the hierarchy is useful, that the law in these cases is not going to be able to capture every single situation. So I think that California's decision is an interesting one. I think a concern, though, is that this puts a lot of power in the hands of doctors, that the doctor gets to decide based on pretty fluid criteria, or pretty broad criteria, I should say, who gets to make these kinds of decisions. And you can imagine that the doctor might have preferences based on the kind of decision that the doctor wants the substitute decision maker to make. And so that might be a way that the doctor can kind of exert more control and end up make it such that the patient is going to get care that the patient wouldn't choose for themselves, but that the doctor thinks is the right call by choosing one substitute decision maker over another.
He loves to rock climb.
One way that this is just not realistic at all is that the hospital lawyer said, I put in an emergency injunction, and then all of a sudden the judge is just like here in the hospital. I can assure you that that is almost never the way that it works. It looks like the judge was just like hanging downstairs in the cafeteria and like, oh yeah, I can pop up, no problem. So now she's here in the patient's room, it looks like, which is, yeah, like I said, very much not how it usually goes.
He loves to rock climb, scuba dive, bungee jump.
This is insane, please. We're trying to figure out what your son would want.
I want to live.
I want that too, but if there's a way that we can save Marco's leg, he'd want me to do it.
Do you know what he wanted? He wanted to marry you. He wanted to spend his life with you, have children with you. He can do all that with a prosthetic leg.
This nicely captures that both sides in this disagreement, I think, are acting genuinely. They really do believe that they are acting in Marco's best interest. And they're having a genuine disagreement about the risks involved, that the patient's fiancé is saying, I think that taking the 10% risk of death is worth it for Marco to save his leg. He'll live a better life, according to her, if he has his leg. And the parents are saying 10% chance is just not worth it. And this is as good of an example as any where this isn't a science disagreement. Like, they are all in agreement about the facts. They aren't disagreeing, well, I think it actually is a 15% chance or a 5% chance. Instead, the disagreement is about values, about how much it matters to take this risk and what the trade-offs are. Great example where we can't rely on medicine as such, as medicine as science, where to settle this issue. It's really a disagreement about what Marco himself would choose and what's in Marco's best interest.
When we met,
I don't care about your stories. I don't care.
I have not been around a lot of judges, but I've been in some situations where there's a judge involved in kind of making these healthcare decisions, and it's this judge is very much the least talkative judge, the least assertive judge I've ever seen. That she's basically just letting the family go back and forth and taking notes. So that just does not seem like the way that it would probably go.
We are his parents, and you're not his wife yet.
That's a good example of why the law where there's a rigid hierarchy is a little bit puzzling, because his fiancée is not going to know him any better in an hour when they get married. So the only thing that's going to change is that they'll be legally married. And so in many places, that would give her the right to start making decisions for him. This is all actually, I should say, too, that many places recognize common law relationships. And so she might already be able to be the legal substitute decision maker, depending on like if they were living together before and so on. But this shows that if it's about like who is actually best placed to make the decision, who knows him best, then the fact of whether they're legally married or not is not really going to make a difference to it.
So help you God?
Yes. Dr. Melendez can tell you.
He has. But the fake femur is yours, though, right? How confident are you in its design?
It's not fake.
She needs to know.
I know what she needs to know. She needs to know, will it work? She needs to know how long it will last.
Yes.
Another thing that's a little bit puzzling about the judge's presence here is that they kind of are going back and forth about whether she's trying to figure out who the best decision maker is or if she's trying to figure out what the right decision is. So as the legal matter, the lawyer served the injunction to figure out who the appropriate legal substitute decision maker is, which is kind of like agnostic about what the right medical decision is in this case. That is, the debate is over, should it be the parents making this decision or should it be Marco's fiance? And that is like, I think that like why this is implausible is that if we're assuming that there was this rigid hierarchy, then the law is already pretty clear cut and the judge wouldn't really get involved in this case. But in this context, the kind of investigation or the question seems to be more about what actually the right decision is and like what would be appropriate for him, what's in Marco's best interest, which judges, of course, like make that kind of decision, but it's not clear that that's like the right like level of investigation here.
This thing has never been done before.
Be quiet! Toes are changing color. He's clotting. Page Dr. Melendez stat.
All right, we need a decision now. We cutting off the leg or replacing the bone?
There's no doubt in my mind that Marco's parents and fiance all love Marco.
Now. I need a decision now.
His parents know him as their child. Sonia knows him as a man. Replace the femur.
What? His parents know him as a child, but Sonia knows him as a man? What kind of argument is that? They both made really good arguments that they know Marco, so what is this like know him as a man stuff? That is a strange judgment.
Blood flow is restored.
He's not going to
we're
reject.
monitoring him very closely. The biggest threat
He
is
moved. It worked.
Are you ready to finish what we started?
Get well first. There's plenty of time for a wedding.
No, man, if you have just been in a car crash and you didn't get to get married, lock it down right away. Get somebody in there, do the ceremony right there. I would not be delaying anymore. This episode is a really good example of the puzzle that medicine encounters and that I, as a clinical ethicist, encounter on a regular basis. Most of my consults involve situations of this form where there's disagreements about what the right thing to do is, or disagreements about who should be making the decisions. And this shows the puzzle of it, that most people do not have advance directives where they list what they want done in situations. And even if Marco had an advance directive, it's unlikely that it would cover this kind of situation where he was in a crash that, there's a decision about whether to amputate his leg or to take this risky surgery. So this shows that we need to have substitute decision makers. We can't really have a system where people have just stated their wishes for every type of possibility that will come up. But this also shows the difficulty of that system, that deciding who should make these choices for a patient is difficult, that reasonable people will disagree. People who all love the patient, all care about him, are going to disagree about what the right thing to do is. And it also shows that this is a lot to put on families, that these kinds of disagreements can have a lasting effect that can really strain relationships, and that it puts a lot of pressure on the families making these decisions. So imagine if this wasn't a TV show and if, I think her name's Sonia, Marco's fiance, that if she had really advocated for the surgery to put in the femur, but then he had died, that would be on her conscience that she had made that decision. And that in kind of that way it was the wrong decision, even if she was justified in making it. So this is the puzzle, or the problem even, of substitute decision making. It's really difficult to kind of imagine what a better system would be, because we do want people who can make decisions in an informed way for patients. Families, loved ones, friends, those are the kinds of people that we have to turn to. But this shows some of the problems that arise from it. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.
Why is the primary